Okay, hello everybody. Hello here in the hall. Hello on the YouTube live stream. This is yet another edition of the RITMO seminar series, where we invite internationally respected scholars to present their research related to our Center of Excellence. Today we have Janeen Loehr, who is a professor in the Department of Psychology and Health Studies at the University of Saskatchewan, Canada. Her research investigates cognitive and neural mechanisms of interpersonal coordination, their impact on the sense of agency, and in both individuals and groups, and how experiences, particularly strong experiences of group agency, contribute to health and well-being. Professor Loehr addresses these questions primarily in music-making contexts and uses a multi-methods approach that includes both quantitative and qualitative methods. She is leading the University of Saskatchewan's EEG hyperscanning lab and is a founding member of an interdisciplinary research cluster called PICASSO, or a PICASSO, meaning promoting interpersonal connection and alignment for self and society. The mission of this research cluster is to investigate how basic mechanisms of interpersonal coordination can be leveraged to address complex health and social challenges, which is something we will also hear about today, I guess. So please take the floor and go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. Thank you for that introduction. I will talk about all of those things a little bit throughout my talk. So today I'm going to tell you about the sense of joint agency in group music making, which is just one small aspect of how it feels or can feel to make music together with other people. I thought I'd start with just a bit of background about my approach or how I arrived at this research topic. So I'm a cognitive neuroscientist, and I have spent most of my work investigating mechanisms that allow people to coordinate actions together with each other. We call this joint action in my area, which just means anytime two or more people coordinate their actions to achieve a common goal. Joint actions are everywhere in our daily lives, everything from carrying something heavy together, which is an example we use very often, through to music making or pushing a car out of a snowbank, which we won't have to do anymore, right, this season. And most of my work has looked at coordination mechanisms in the context of making music or music-like sequences with people. I had done some early work looking at how people time their actions very precisely in order to synchronize with other people. Some work looking at how people monitor their own actions and other people's actions to ensure that their own individual goals and their shared goals are achieved. Using kind of minimalist experimental tasks, and occasionally I have the opportunity to do something with a larger group. So here we looked at neural mechanisms of coordination with the Saskatoon Symphony Orchestra, just with 4 violinists during a dress rehearsal. You see here, I often use EEG to measure people's brain activity. I'll talk a little bit about that work in my talk. But in recent years, I've become interested not just in the mechanisms that allow people to coordinate, but actually, like, what does it feel like to be coordinating with others? And in particular, how coordinating impacts people's sense of agency in joint action or musical joint action more specifically. So the sense of agency is your feeling of generating and controlling actions and their consequences. So if we just take the example of a person playing a simple melody on a keyboard, their sense of agency is their feeling that I'm the one who's playing the music, or I'm the one who's eliciting the tones. I've got it here in quotes as though you're like really thinking about that, but of course it's usually a low-level, pre-reflective feeling of agency, but people can report on it if we ask them to. When people are doing tasks alone, agency seems pretty straightforward for the most part. People have individual agency over their individual actions. Of course, things can go sideways sometimes where you feel like you accidentally made something happen when you didn't actually, or stuff like that. But for the most part, it seems straightforward. But even so, there's still a lot of different mechanisms contributing to our sense of agency, even in solo action. So this is just a model of agency in solo context. I'm not going to get into the details. It's not my model. But I just want to note that we have sensory motor contributions, cognitive contributions, and affective contributions, and I will be touching on those levels with respect to joint agency. Okay, so then we can think about what happens when people are actually coordinating with another person, what happens to their sense of agency. And just to help us think about that, we can just think briefly about the structure of joint actions. This is not overly complicated, but a joint action is made up of two people's parts. I have my part, you have your part, and we have to coordinate them in some relation to each other to achieve a shared goal. So maybe we are synchronizing with each other, maybe we're taking turns, maybe we're moving in the same direction or opposite directions, and we're trying to achieve a shared goal, for example, of playing a duet together. And so we see that same structure in the sense of agency for joint actions. So each person can have, and I'm just talking from the example of the person on the left here, but each person can have a sense of individual agency for their own individual actions. So like I'm playing my part of this duet. You can have a sense of agency about what your partner's doing as well. And then what I'm going to focus on today, which is that people can also have a collective sense of agency for the shared goal. So the feeling that we are playing this duet together, which I will refer to as joint agency, and that's what I'll focus on. So theoretical work on joint agency has suggested that it might take several different forms. So kind of the most the strongest form, I guess you could say, is a sense that we are acting as one, as though the feeling is like we're a single unit. We have one mind, one body. Maybe you get that if you have danced the Macarena recently, I don't know. Then there is also a sense that's less as a single unit, but rather two individuals, but still sharing agency. So agency is distributed between the people in a task. So if you're moving a couch with someone, you probably feel shared control over the direction the couch is moving, or how fast it's moving and things like that. And then you can also have a sense of independent agency, which is the sense that you're acting independently of each other, even though you're coordinating towards a shared goal. You might think about doing a puzzle if you're both sort of on separate ends and you're each doing your own pieces. You know you're working together towards a goal, but you're feeling more independent and not really sharing control. There's a recent conceptual discussion about whether these are different states or more of a continuum between sort of feeling like an individual sense of identity as an agent on the one end, like an I as part of an us, to a strong sense of we as a single unit on the other end. We're trying to do some conceptual work on that right now, but I won't talk about that today. Instead, what I'll talk about is the work we've done looking at mechanisms that push people towards the we end of the spectrum, sensory, motor, cognitive, and social and affective a little bit, as well as the short and long-term impacts of experiencing joint agency with other people. Yes, as mentioned, I use a multi-method approach, so we do some lab-based work with fairly simple paradigms sometimes. We do also use qualitative methods, and then sometimes we get to do studies in the real world. So you'll see a little bit of each of those. So starting with sensory motor mechanisms, so kind of the early studies we did on joint agency focused on action prediction and just looking at whether people's need or ability to predict the timing of their partner's actions would strengthen their sense of joint agency. And that's based on Pachery's foundational work on joint agency, suggesting that this should be a major driving mechanism. We and others have done a bunch of different manipulations. I'll just tell you about one of them today. And so we're not at music yet. This is just a tapping task. So we have people come in, and this is work done by my former graduate student, Nicole Bolt. So we had people come in and tap, sit by side, and tap on force-sensitive resistors. And they always heard a sequence of pacing tones, and then their task was to produce a sequence at the same pace. And in one of our experiments, we manipulated whether they produced their tones in alternation, so person 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, or sequentially, so person 1 does all of their tones, and then person 2 does all of their tones. We call the person who goes first the leader, and the person who goes second the follower. And we expected that people would report a stronger sense of joint agency in the alternating task, when they have to mutually adapt to each other on every turn, to each other's timing on every turn. And also for followers compared to leaders, especially in the sequential task, because the follower has to adapt to whatever the leader has done on their taps or their tones, But the leader just produces their taps and then doesn't have to do anything after the follower turn. Okay, and we asked them to rate their sense of joint agency after every trial. Here, our rating scale has stronger joint agency as lower values, and so you can see that people did report stronger joint agency in the alternating condition compared to sequential, and followers, who are shown in red, reported stronger joint agency than leaders, especially in the sequential condition. And we'd like to explain this in terms of sensory motor activation, especially during the partner's tones. So, of course, your own sensory motor system is engaged when you're producing tones yourself, because you have to actually execute the actions. But we thought there was different degrees of sensory motor activation when your partner is tapping, depending on whether you need to adapt to them or not. And so right now we are just working on a study to get direct evidence of this, so measuring EEG from partners while they engage in these tapping tasks, and seeing if sensory motor activity during the partner's taps predicts their sense of joint agency at the end of the trial. So I don't have direct data about that now. My student has just finished data collection. She's analyzing it. But I do have some indirect evidence. So this is motor-related brain activity from a study in which we had people doing the tapping tasks while we measured EEG from them. But in this study, we didn't ask them about their sense of joint agency, so we don't have a direct link. But still, the pattern matches the theoretical explanation I have just provided. So I know this plot's a bit intense, but what we've looked at is activity power in the beta frequency band, measured by EEG from participants while they're tapping, over electrode C3, which is contralateral to their tapping hand, so they're tapping with their right hand. And I've plotted here, so they're doing the sequential task. So the leader produces the first two tones, and then the follower produces the second two tones. And then we've got the motor activity from the leader in the blue line and from the follower in the red line. And starting first with the leader, so we expect to see suppression of beta oscillations during one's own taps, because that's just a very common pattern. And relative to a baseline, so our baseline's at 0, and you do see in the leader, you see suppressed beta activity during their own taps, which is reassuring. But during the follower's taps, you see a release from suppression. So that would suggest they're not engaging their sensory motor system during the follower's taps. Whereas for the follower in the red line, so they're producing the last two taps, and you see that they have suppression during their own action execution. But what's quite nice is they're also showing suppression while the leader is tapping. So that suggests that they are engaging their sensory motor system during the leader's taps. So that asymmetry, we think, can probably account for some portion of their sense of joint agency during these tapping tasks, and now we just need a final study with direct evidence to provide evidence for that. So that's kind of some initial work looking at sensory motor contributions to joint agency. And then the next series of studies, we wanted to look at cognitive contributions to joint agency, and in particular, cognitive contributions that go beyond sensory motor engagement. So for this series of studies, we use a synchronization task. So basically, one person's producing a tone sequence, the melody in the case of simple duets, and the other person's also producing their own tone sequences, and they have to synchronize the onsets together, which means that they're both engaging their sensory and motor systems throughout the task. So when we manipulate the content of the sequences, we are not also manipulating sensory motor requirements of the task, or the motor requirements of the task. For this series of studies, we use e-music boxes. So these are these spinning disc devices. All you have to do is spin the disc, and it emits tones at different points in the sequence. We use these so that we can recruit novices to participate in our studies, so that we don't have to rely on people just with extensive musical expertise. So this is what they sound like. So they're making very simple duets together. And this is work that's led by my graduate student, Zejun, who's here and also playing for us here. So in the first study, we manipulated what kind of sequences they synchronized with each other. So we had them synchronize constant pitches, which is basically each person's just playing the same pitch repeated, and they have to synchronize the note onsets. And then we had them play very simple versions of familiar children's songs as duets, where they had to synchronize their note onsets, but also produce harmonic and metrical relations between them while doing so. And what we hoped to see was that duets would elicit stronger joint agency despite equivalent synchronization performance in the two conditions. This is based on some previous work showing that our representations of joint action do include the relations between the parts. So, you know, whether we're moving in the same direction or opposite directions, or the temporal relations like synchrony or metrical relations and harmonic relations like you see here. There's also some evidence from joint agency tasks that don't require synchronization to suggest that those relations between parts do influence people's sense of joint agency. We just wanted to know if that goes beyond effects of coordination, like how well coordinated they are. And so that is indeed what we found. So here I'm plotting for you people's sense of joint agency. Higher ratings mean stronger joint agency as a function of how well coordinated they were. So this is asynchrony, so smaller values are better coordination. First thing to note is that coordination does have a strong impact on joint agency, and we've seen that consistently. So the better coordinated you are up here, the stronger your sense of joint agency. But the important thing from this study was that if you compare joint agency for duets in the black line versus constant pitches in the dashed line at equal levels of coordination performance, you see stronger joint agency for the duets compared to the constant pitches, up to a certain point. Once performance gets pretty bad, that no longer holds. Okay, so that was in line with our hypothesis that the relations between parts would influence people's sense of joint agency. And in a second study, we wanted to see if we could get more specific about exactly how that is having an impact. So here we ran an EEG study. This time it's a hyperscanning setup, so we're measuring from both people in the pair throughout their performances. This was run during COVID, so Janeen made a valiant effort to follow safety protocols, and our participants were very willing to participate anyway, so that was very exciting. And we looked at both individual measures of brain activity from each person separately, as well as coupling between the two people's brain activity. And we used a mediation type of structure for this study. So our plan was to see first whether our manipulation of sequence type, so duets compared to constant pitches, would influence different neural markers related to coordination. And then if so, whether those neural markers mediate the effect of sequence type on joint agency. So for this study, we focused specifically on auditory activity, so brain activity related to auditory processing. That's because the actions they're making are identical and more or less synchronized. And so the main difference between the two sequence types is what kind of auditory outcomes they're producing. So we filtered the data to focus specifically on auditory activity. And then we looked at 3 different markers of brain activity. So first we looked at event-related desynchronization of beta oscillations. This is a measure that is specifically about predictive timing. So, you know, the degree to which people are predicting what their partner's going to do and when. And we didn't expect to see any differences between conditions here because they're synchronizing tone onsets together in both cases. And we did not see any differences, so I won't talk about that one further. We also looked at the individual marker of auditory N1 and P2 ERPs, or event-related potentials. So these are brain responses to tone onsets whose amplitude reflects how engaged people are, attentional engagement while playing the sequences together or hearing tones together. And we expected to see larger ERPs for the duets compared to the constant pitch sequences because the duets have features that are known to elicit attentional engagement. They're more interesting. They have metrical structures which influence attention, and so on. And that is what we found. So here is the auditory ERPs. Time 0 is the onset of the melody tones, regardless of who's producing them. So you see the N1 here, which is a negative going potential 100 milliseconds after tone onset, and you can see it's larger, more negative in the duets compared to the constant pitches. And same for the P2. So this is a positive going potential, about 200 milliseconds after tone onset, and it too is larger for the duets compared to the constant pitches. And then the last neural marker that we looked at is interbrain phase coupling, which is capturing how well synchronized the two people's brains are with respect to auditory processing. We expected that this might capture some coupling of higher level cognitive processes during the task, and we expected it would be greater during when coordinating the musical duets compared to the constant pitch sequences. And that is also what we found. So you see higher interbrain coupling for the duets compared to the constant pitches. So that's the first part of our mediation analysis kind of confirmed. So our manipulation of sequence type influenced both interbrain phase coupling and auditory ERPs. And then when we did the mediation statistical analyses, both of those were significant mediators of the effect of sequence type on joint agency. So there's a path here from sequence type through the neural markers to joint agency. And then in a follow-up analysis, we actually looked at whether auditory ERPs themselves mediate the effect of sequence type on interbrain coupling. And that mediation also turned out to be significant. So what this pattern of mediations tells us is that duets, compared to constant pitches, enhance attention, as we can see from the auditory ERPs. And that enhanced attention increases interbrain coupling and also strengthens people's sense of joint agency. So the conclusion from this study is that attentional processing influences people's sense of joint agency above and beyond the degree of synchronization that they achieve. So that's sort of what we've done so far in terms of sensory motor contributions and cognitive contributions. I will say that in all of these studies, we're measuring something towards the middle of the scale, or the shared agency type of joint agency. We sometimes ask people on this visual scale to rate their sense of joint agency, where you have sort of two completely independent circles versus two fully overlapping circles. And in these studies, most of the ratings fall around 4 or 5. So it's not united as a whole, but two people sharing control over the sequence. So to get at the farther end of the scale, so people's sense of united agency or acting as one, which is also sometimes referred to as we agency, depending on which literature you're reading, we have to do something different than probably having people come in and tap or play very simple duets on the music boxes. There hadn't been a ton of systematic work looking at people's experiences of united agency a few years ago. There were descriptions of it in studies of other things. So just as a reminder, united agency is this feeling like this person describes, suddenly everything falls into place as if one person was playing, not several, for a few seconds. And there are quite a few descriptions of this in Gabrielson's book about strong experiences with music. And you also see them there's an ethnographic analysis of dancing at a rave, also of a Japanese motorcycle gang. This is doing like a group ride together. Some hints in sports, including paired figure skating. I've also since then seen reports in contemporary dance and rugby and some other places. But what we wanted to do then was to do some systematic work, collecting stories or experiences of united agency and seeing if we can identify some features that facilitate the experience and then what effects it has on people. So here I'll tell you about 2 surveys we've done where we asked people to tell us about memorable experiences of united agency. We define it for them as a sense of acting as one, so of feeling like you're acting as a single unit or being one with the group. In the first survey we did, we asked undergraduate psych students to tell us about one memorable experience in any type of joint action. We asked them a series of short answer questions, and then we did a quantitative analysis of the frequencies of different features. And that was done by my now master's student, now PhD student, On. And then in the second survey, we focused specifically on group music making. And we asked people to provide us quite detailed written descriptions of 1 or 2 memorable experiences. And we ended up with 77 stories from 51 participants, a broader range of ages. Both surveys were mostly women and either fully in Canada or mostly in Canada. And in survey 2, we did a reflexive thematic analysis to develop themes across their stories. I suspect survey 2 is probably of more interest here, but I like to present them together because I think they triangulate quite nicely with each other. This one was done in collaboration with Justin Christensen and Jennifer Nickel. Okay, and here is just a figure telling you what kinds of joint actions people reported among the undergraduate survey. So actually a lot of experiences in sports contexts, team sports, and then you see music represented quite well as well, so listening or playing with other people, as well as dancing, and then some in exercise classes and spiritual gatherings and rallies. So quite a variety of different activities. Okay, so the results from survey 1 will be on the left and survey 2 on the right. So the first thing we coded for was the presence of synchronous and identical movements. This is based on some theoretical work suggesting that you should be most likely to feel like you're acting as one if you're doing the exact same thing at the exact same time, like marching in a military context, that type of thing, because your sensory motor systems are engaged essentially identically, more or less. So in the undergraduate survey data, we coded for that, and you can see that that feature was present in about a quarter of the stories. This is just an example of one description of it. So the three of us did all of the same memorized moves, did things at the exact same time, and had our karate uniforms make the same crisp snap sound at the same time. We also then coded for whether the activities were rhythmic, thinking that, you know, maybe it doesn't have to be identical movements, but some entrainment to a beat might help. And some, you know, in a rhythmic context, some of the movements would be in synchrony and possibly identical. And that accounted for another quarter of the activities. But then a large chunk of them were not rhythmic and not synchronous and identical. So suggesting that it's certainly not a requirement to have this experience of joint agency. Now in the group music making, this is all music context, so all rhythmic, but some of the stories, not too many, but some of them did describe this sort of synchronous and identical element. So in this example, when I focused on the acting as one, it was especially during the unisono passages where we were all in sync, not only in sound, but also in movement. For example, if all the strings would both synchronized or everyone moved on the chairs from left to right in the same rhythm. So we saw that represented sometimes, but not all the time. So that suggests that a sort of like perfect, if you will, self-other overlap at the sensory motor level is not necessary to elicit united agency, though it is present in some cases. The second and third feature we coded for was people's level of experience with the joint actions and also with the co-actors they were doing them with. So in our undergrad survey, you can see that people generally reported situations where they were either very experienced or somewhat experienced, but they could still have this experience with when they were new to an activity. And also they were almost always with people who were in a close relationship with them, either all of the people or some of the people. Close relationship would be like long-term friends or relationship partners or like long-term teammates or groups that perform together. But you could still have the experience with acquaintances and strangers as well. And then here, this aspect rose to the level of a theme in the music data. So the first theme that we identified in this data set was that prior experience facilitates but is not necessary for united agency. So in this data set, experiences of united agency often occurred when participants had prior experience with some aspect of the music making. Music making in general, so most of the participants were highly skilled amateurs at the time of the experience, though there was a range as well. Most reporting having a lot of experience with the piece itself or their co-performers. But again, just like in the undergrad survey, the experience was also reported when people were beginners or playing with strangers. Some people reported even like I had this experience, the first note of the first orchestra performance I ever attended in 5th grade, like that level of, beginner. So again, experience and close relationships are not necessary to have the experience, though they seem to help it happen. These variables are kind of nice to see this relationship because we know from prior research that experience within a joint action and actually having long-term relationships with people both increase our ability to make predictions, accurate predictions about other people's actions or their action outcomes. So that kind of maps nicely onto the sensory motor experiments that I talked about. But we also know that relationships also increase self-other overlap at a conceptual level, or like the level of the narrative self. So, you know, this is from relationship studies where people are asking about how much you take your aspects of your partner into your own self-concept. So at like kind of high level conceptual self. And so there's room for more work here looking at how exactly the relationships affect people's sense of joint agency. We also coded for what kind of performance settings people were in at the time. So among our undergrads, over half the time they reported being in either a performance setting, so like a public performance in front of an audience, or a competition, so like a sports tournament. But they also reported experiences when they were just doing things for fun, like at a jam session or just playing volleyball on the beach, or while practicing for a performance or competition. At the time, we weren't exactly sure what exactly was driving that. Some possibilities are that the shared goal becomes very salient when you're performing for an audience or when you're competing for something. There's also possibly a role of physiological arousal. There is some prior research showing that links between physiological arousal during large-scale joint actions and people's feelings of like social bonding and stuff. So that's a possibility. But then in our survey of group music making, our participants helped us out here with this one because they reported that performance settings that enhance attention or mutual attention to each other facilitate united agency. So experiences of united agency often occurred in settings that enhanced attention to the music, to other performers, or the audience. Here too in this survey, a lot of the experiences were reported as happening in public performance settings. And our participants explicitly wrote about how these settings enhance their attention to the music or to other people. So that was evident in their quotes about what they were describing. They also noted some other elements of performance that could enhance those types of attention. So they talked about singing. Like one participant said, this experience is more likely to happen when I'm singing with other people compared to playing instruments because that forces me to attend more to our mutual breathing and to the tone. Performing without a conductor, likewise, forces more enhanced attention to the co-performers while performing. And also, some of the cases involve performing from memory, which people linked to reduced distraction from the score or their music stands. So that, I think, fits nicely with the experimental evidence of an effective attention on joint agency. And then in these surveys is where we start to get into some social and affective contributions, potentially. So this is a word cloud of the frequency of different emotion words that were used in people's stories in the group music making survey. The word cloud from the undergraduates is very similar. So you can see here they reported positive emotions, often powerful ones, like thrilling, euphoric, joyful. But importantly for this part of the survey is that they also reported that these emotions contributed to their experience. So when asked why did you have the experience, or why do you think you had the experience? In our undergrad survey, people said it was probably due to the serotonin and adrenaline I was feeling about the event, or because while it was happening, I felt a sense of belonging and happiness that is hard to describe. In the group music making survey, we saw something similar. So the experience usually happens when the music is particularly moving on an emotional level. And then people also reported feeling like this was shared among co-performers. So like because we were feeling the same emotions, and it felt like we all had the same emotions and feelings. So this suggests that these positive emotions might potentially be a cause and a consequence, because we also asked people like, how did you feel during the experience? And that's when they reported these positive emotions. And that aligns with some work that there's an ethnographic analysis of experiences of like this in a large community choir from Stevens in 2021. He has a really nice model of the dynamic relationship between emotions and United Agency, and sort of positive emotions and negative emotions, and how we kind of fall in and out of those states. So I think there's room for further work there too, looking at, are these causal mechanisms, and are they actually shared or not? Is it just a feeling that it's shared, or are they actually shared? And if so, how do they spread among people in the group? A couple other things I want to note is that in the first survey, we also had some measures of individual differences. So in that survey, in addition to having them report about one memorable experience, we also asked them to just say, to think about all the times they had the experience and how often do you have the experience. And this is, most people said at least occasionally, if not frequently or very frequently. And then we checked whether that was correlated with individual differences in empathy or the big 5 personality traits, or also how often they engage in social activities in general. So not surprisingly, the frequency of social activities was a strong predictor. So the more often they do joint actions, the more often they're going to have the experience of United Agency. But extroversion also was a predictor. So extroverted people are more inclined to engage in social interactions and also seek positive stimulation. Agreeableness also correlated. That's your sort of how pro-social you are as a person. And also cognitive empathy. So how good you are at understanding other people's emotions. And we did some mediation analyses here too, and we confirmed that extroversion in particular had an effect above and beyond the frequency of social activities. So regardless of how often you engage in joint actions, if you're extroverted, you're more likely to have this experience more often. And then a note about group size, just in case people are interested. These are plots of the group size that people reported of their memorable experiences in the undergrad survey and the music making. My scale's a little, I went based on what they were reporting. So it's not a linear scale, 2 or 3 here, 11 to 15 or 1,000 plus. But the point is that there doesn't seem to be a systematic relationship. So from the undergrad survey, we thought maybe small to medium groups were more likely, but that does not really seem to be the case in the group music making. So more work might need to be done here. These, of course, are memorable experiences, not all experiences, but so far, nothing systematic appearing about group size. Okay, so summing up this part, am I still good for time? Okay. In terms of what we can conclude from the survey's data that I presented so far, we can see that some features seem to facilitate the experience of United Agency, features that enhance our ability to make predictions about others' actions, including rhythm or synchrony, experience with the joint action, or experience with other group members. Features that enhance attention to shared goals, like public performance or competitive settings, possibly a role of positive emotions, individual differences in empathy, extroversion, and agreeableness. And I still think there's a possibility of physiological arousal here, but I don't have evidence of that directly. But we can also conclude that none of these features seem to be necessary to elicit the experience, which suggests that it's probably combinations of different features that work together. We have some plans for some semantic network analyses of our survey data to see if we can see if there are common groupings. I think we just need to collect a bit more data on that first. So that's something that's coming. Okay, and then the last part, I want to shift to talking about the consequences of these powerful experiences of United Agency. The third theme that we found in the study of group music making, so this will all come from the group music making data now, was that United Agency strongly impacts people's bodies, emotions, and their relations with others. So in terms of impacts on the body, people reported, bodily sensations directly, so feelings of warmth and tingling and chills, goosebumps. Sensations of synchrony as well, particularly with respect to breathing. So although she was perhaps 100 feet and 2 stories away from me, it felt as if I could feel when she was breathing and I breathed at the same time. A sense of expansiveness in the auditory domain, so being awash in a bath of sound or a tsunami of sound surrounded me. They also remarked on auditory beauty, so the chorus was so gorgeous I thought my head would explode. And also a sensation of being lifted up or opened up. So as if we were running and our feet left the ground and we were airborne. So a variety of different impacts on bodily sensations. In terms of emotions, I already showed you the word cloud of emotion words, but one thing I want to note here is that in particular in the group music making survey, there were a number of words related to self-transcendent experiences, self-transcendent emotions. So these are emotions like awe, gratitude, love, those types of things. They were more common in the music making survey than our undergraduates. I don't know if that's meaningful, but I just want to mention it. And people also mentioned other aspects of self-transcendent experiences, including a connection to the broader environment or things more broadly. So it was like being initiated into the harmony of the spheres, the harmony of the universe, that type of thing, as well as spiritual sensations. So I'm not a religious person, but in those moments, I feel a strong spiritual connection to something outside of myself. So these are all associated with self-transcendent experiences, also peak experiences with music. So it makes sense, I think. And then in terms of relationships with others, I already mentioned that people reported feeling like the experience was shared. So it felt like we all had the same emotions and feelings. It made me feel a very strong rush of shared emotions between me, the members of my choir, and every single person in the audience. I like that one for its audience involvement. People, not surprisingly, reported a powerful sense of connection, so a sense of transcendent togetherness or oneness and belonging that is unmatched in my lifetime. And also a sense that everyone involved in the joint action was equally important. So each of us on stage was essential. It wasn't really a question of following or leading. And then the fourth theme that we saw in this data set was that those are sort of like short-term, in-the-moment impacts, but people also reported long-lasting impacts. Some people directly mentioned a lifelong impact. So I'm in my 70s now, but I was a teenager then, and I will never forget that feeling. Or it's a sensation I've drawn on and continue to draw on throughout my life. People reported that it had effects on long-term social bonding, so that the connection in the moment was a step toward a deeper relationship and development. At the time, the person I was with was a complete stranger, but we've been close friends ever since. People reported that the experiences were meaningful and transformative, so it was extremely meaningful and changed the way I look at all performances I play today. And then they also reported an effect on their motivation to engage in group music performance and also to advocate for it, that other people should also engage in it. It's one of the main reasons I wanted to be and still want to be a performing musician, and I tell everyone they know they should be in a choir together. It's just so good on many levels. And so the last set of study I want to tell you about is sort of one attempt we made to see if we could leverage experiences that elicit joint agency in a type of intervention that could support people in different ways. So this Music Memory Makers project is where we tried to design a wellness intervention for dementia care using the e-music boxes. So taking a slightly different direction here. But we wanted to do in this study was to develop those electronic music boxes to see if they could be feasible as a tool for meaningful interaction between couples over the course of dementia disease. Part of the motivation for this was that for dementia care, shared activities are recommended to support relationship continuity. There's some research showing that your sense of couplehood or supporting or strengthening a sense of couplehood can relieve the increased demands of caring for a spouse who has dementia. And we also know that musical behaviors can continue even in severe dementia. So what we did is we used a multi-phase project. It was a small-scale project, but 2 phases. So in the first phase, we did a bit of participant-informed design with 3 older couples not living with dementia. We asked them to come in and play the music boxes together and then make suggestions for how we could make them more enjoyable or more feasible for use. In the process of doing this, we sort of changed how the music boxes work. So I showed you a version where there's tones coming out at just different rotation points. Here, we changed them so that people could play commercial songs together as duets. So what we did is we figured out a way to arrange commercial songs as a duet. Basically, we split them into parts. so that we could give one person like the vocals and the lead guitar, and then the other person, the other guitars or the drums. So they essentially each have one half of the commercial recording, and then they have to spin more or less in synchrony with each other to, if they're perfectly synchronized, it will sound like the original recording. We also implemented different coordination smoothing levels. So some simple smoothing with 7 different levels to allow people either to play with no smoothing or to have their coordination smooth like significantly. Just to make the room for opportunity to play these successfully like stronger. We also, in this version of the study, we had a resynchronize option where the experimenter could push a button if the people got too out of sync with each other to bring them back to synchrony. Since then, we've actually automated that in the processing so that the program will do it automatically if you turn that feature on. We also tried to make the interfaces a little more adaptable in this version of the study, so we added these different handles to sort of like support people's ergonomic needs. This version, we still were using this is commercially available stuff. We take this from the game DJ Hero and then kind of like take them apart and build them into something else. Since then, we've developed 3D printed versions. This is a box shape. We also have one that's a cylinder that makes it a little easier to hold with different handles. And we also have published the 3D printing templates as well as like the build instructions and the software for splitting the commercials and for running the music boxes on our GitHub, so you can find all of that as well. Okay, and then in the second phase, we did a feasibility pilot study. So we recruited 3 couples unaffected by dementia and 2 couples living with dementia. This is, you can see, well, the first thing we were interested in is whether they could do the task and enjoy it. And so this is a sort of like some evidence that they did enjoy the task, high-fiving each other after playing a song together. We asked them to rate how challenging they found it, how enjoyable, and their sense of joint agency. So you can see their ratings, not very challenging, so that's reassuring, very enjoyable for the most part, and again, that same sense of shared joint agency that we are seeing in our other studies with the music boxes. Sometimes people are reporting also the very overlapping circles as well. And then we analyzed their behavior. So essentially what we did is we had them play, we asked them to give us 3 songs from their personal history. We arranged them as duets, and then we had them play those songs together over about an hour. And we video recorded it, and we analyzed their behaviors, as well as we talked to them about their experience. So it's semi-structured interviews about it. So in terms of their behaviors, playing the music boxes did evoke positive interactions, so people were very mutually attentive to each other, responsive to playing together. There was a lot of words of encouragement and teasing back and forth between members of the couple, a lot of smiles, laughter, singing, music, moving with the music. And playing their songs together evoked positive memories, so they often told stories that were special to them about their romance or about their shared history as parents, or about their individual and mutual identities. For example, one couple asked for a hymn, and then that inspired them to talk about their faith identities over the course of their relationship. So that, we think, is some evidence for a possible therapeutic benefits of reaffirming couplehood when playing these together. Also, people reported that it was an enjoyable activity spared by dementia. So our spousal caregiver says he's lost his ability to play cards or do games that we used to do, but I think this is something we could do. Even the girls, like their kids, would have fun with these together. And a spouse with dementia agrees that, yes, I think this would be something to do, something different to do, keeps you motivated. So that suggests they might possibly, that reinforces the idea that they could possibly be useful to elicit therapeutic benefits. And so since we published this pilot version, Justin Christensen, who was also leading on this project, has since done quite a bit of work, also together with Jenny McRitchie, taking these out to people living with dementia and doing focus group studies, and people love them. Like, they're very excited, and it seems very fun for everyone. So I think there's more evidence to come that these are positive, potentially positive interactions, tools for potentially positive interactions. Okay, so that is all the studies I wanted to tell you about. So just in terms of some conclusions and future directions. So in terms of the question of what pushes people towards we, Hopefully I've convinced you that we are seeing contributions of sensory motor mechanisms, cognitive, and maybe social and affective mechanisms too. They probably have different contributions depending on the context of the joint action that you're performing. And so we have some future work to do looking at how the different mechanisms combine. Maybe we'll have a model that's like similarly complicated for a joint agency just as for solo agency. All of the strong experiences data that we have so far comes from retrospective reports, right? We ask people to like reflect on past experiences. So it'd be nice to have some real-time measurement or close to real-time. And also in the lab, we ask people just for one single rating after each trial. So it'd be nice to see if there's dynamic changes over time. And so Loehr and I have spent this week analyzing those data from the concert series, deeply down into the data, which are super exciting, very interesting. So I'll have more to say about that in the future. And in terms of the short and long-term impacts, we can see that these experiences are quite powerful, can potentially benefit mental health and also social bonding. And we've got some work going on related to that as well back at the University of Saskatchewan. So we've got a project looking at how experiences of joint agency might contribute to the development and maintenance of long-term ensembles. That's a project done with a long-running theater ensemble where we interviewed them about their experiences of united agency and how that contributes to their sense of themselves as an ensemble, a strong ensemble. We're also trying to see if we can build joint agency into interventions for health and well-being in different ways. So we've got some work looking at client-therapist interactions. We're in the initial stages of looking at maybe interactions between parents and children around pain. And that work's being done with the cluster that was mentioned, so you can check it out on our website if you're interested. And then I just end by acknowledging everyone who contributed to these projects and funded them. And thank you for your attention.
Thanks a lot. Wow, what an impressive lecture. I really was overwhelmed by your capacity to convey both general and nuanced concepts, like joint versus united agency, and giving the details of the research at the same time. And then again, using both qualitative and quantitative methods. Wow, that's rare and super lively. Thanks a lot. So yes, we are here for debate. We have a first question.
Hi, thanks for your presentation. I really appreciated the broad range of it. I have a question about the first group of projects that you presented on united agency. I apologize for it in advance. This is maybe like a pedantic question, but I was wondering why you chose to use the term united agency over a different term like connection or connectedness or unity. Because as you were going through, I was like, what is this like united agency? And then as you were going through the results, I was thinking, oh, this is connection or connectedness or unity. If you could maybe speak or explain to that point a bit. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a great question. So for me, my interest is in these experiences in the context of acting together. So I'm interested specifically in the context of action. So we can also have these experiences of connection and unity when, for example, like if we're like passively watching a movie together and that type of thing. So I'm interested in how these experiences happen in the context of action. So when we pitch it to participants, that's why we frame it as acting as one, to get at that action, hopefully get at that action aspect, as opposed to something broader. Although I wouldn't be surprised if it's also related to these broader feelings of connection that you would see in these different contexts. But yeah, I'm hoping to get at target the action-related aspects of it.
Yes, Finn, please.
Thank you. Whole range of very interesting things. You didn't talk about this explicitly, but implicit in the design of the studies that you're looking at, there seems to be control over the difficulty of the tasks being performed. And I wonder if you could say more about how the sort of challenge of what people are responsible for may be interacting with their capacity to experience this kind of connection and coordination.
Yeah, also a great question. I think difficulty has an impact. We asked in the one study of the music boxes, the lab-based music box study, we also asked participants why they thought they had stronger joint agency in the musical duets compared to the constant pitches, and difficulty did come up there. They said like, oh, the duets are easier to play, even though their synchrony was the same. I know. So people at least think there is a relationship between difficulty and joint agency. We haven't manipulated difficulty directly, so I don't have direct evidence of that. I would guess that there's probably an optimal level of difficulty, right? If it's too easy, maybe, or too hard, and there's probably something in the middle.
Just as a follow-up to that, with the boxes that you're using, are they both rotating at the same rate, or do you offset them ever? So that people also have like the visual sense of synchrony as they play together as well as...
Yeah, so we have an occluder, so they can't actually see the other person's arm movements.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But they are rotating in the same direction at the same speed. So yeah, we haven't manipulated that either, but yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. A very interesting presentation. I just wonder, because you had like this music making experience survey, did you look into what kind of music they were making, or do you have information about like genre styles? Because I'm just curious if is United Agency or this experience of being like one with another person, is it the same across all kinds of music practices?
What I can say is that there was a variety of different genres. It's not my expertise, so we had an expert musician come in and look at those types of variables. There was nothing systematic in there to report, but I can't be more detailed than that off the top of my head. But yeah, we saw a variety of things, and no one particular type of music seemed to jump out as more common. Yeah, so sort of an answer.
Yes, Alexander?
Yeah, super interesting. So these examples are of human-human joint agency. So I'm also interested in human-machine and machine-machine joint agency. So I'm not sure if this is something you have been looking into, or if you could speculate about. I mean, when you had the different device, I mean, you can say that it's a machine in there somehow, but it's a human, I guess, that you are still interacting with. But how would you speculate in terms of joint or the different types of agency, also in cases where you're dealing with perhaps a human-machine type of system?
Yeah, I would speculate that you probably can have at least a shared agency with a machine interaction, right? Then probably the more predictable, like similar factors would probably come into play there, something that's more predictable, possibly also more human-like. Whether or not you could get all the way to United Agency, I don't know. I haven't done any work on that, but I know people are interested in that, right? So there are studies looking at low-level markers of agency in human-machine or human-robot interaction. So like these different sensory motor level measures, like temporal binding between actions and their consequences. And there's some really interesting findings there. Where people can sort of integrate their machine partner with their own bodies, right, in ways that align with the idea that they would be having a sense of joint agency. I think most of that's at the implicit level and not in terms of explicit reports about joint agency so far, at least. But yeah, there's definitely a body of work there and a lot of interest in that. Yeah.
Yes, Laura, please.
Thank you for the nice talk. I have a question about this questionnaire study. I'm wondering how much of the time people were presenting their stories in the first singular person versus a plural first person, I guess. And so I guess part two of the question might be, are people accurately sensitive to the experience of joint agency of those around them, or do they maybe assume that others are feeling the same as they are, and is that even if it's not founded, if that makes sense?
So we didn't code for I versus we. I am having a memory of my notes saying, like, underlining the word we and feeling like that was important. But yeah, I don't have anything systematic to say about that. I would think they went back and forth between I and we, if I had to guess. And in terms of, are they sensitive to the agency experiences of people around them? So people certainly report feeling like it's shared, but we don't know if that's actually shared or not. In our lab studies, which of course is a different experience, right? But in our lab studies, when we do statistical analyses, we try to account for the fact that they're in a pair on a given trial. There's very little shared variance between the two members of the pair, so they can be having quite different experiences from the same interaction. Of course, that's like kind of, maybe that's less the case for these powerful experiences, I don't know. I would suggest that the link to cognitive empathy maybe suggests that there is some potential link to sensitivity to what others are experiencing. Some indirect evidence maybe, but of course that correlation was also not super strong, so I think there's definitely more work that needs to be done in terms of like, are these actually shared or not, and if so, by who and under what circumstances.
Yes, I have a question too, but Jana first.
Thank you so much. It's a really super interesting and super impressive body of work, and I would have probably so many questions. I don't know quite where to start or what to focus on, but just maybe one comment first. It was really interesting to see that all the qualitative findings that you were reporting of people's these experiences of what was it again? United Agency. And we've seen some really similar findings in looking at concert audiences and their experiences of like these self-transcendent emotions like awe and feeling moved and then feeling connected to both the performers as well as other audience members. So even if they're not actually acting themselves, they can still feel this some sort of a sense of unity or connection and these sort of self-transcendent emotions. And it's really interesting to see that kind of similar pattern. And I had some very specific question about the first study that you were presenting, the EEG study with the beta desynchronization.
Do you want me to go back?
If you could go back to that slide, that would be super helpful.
Oh, can I go back? Oh yeah. I feel like that felt dangerous. Let's see. No, I don't want to update right now. Thank you. Where are we? In here.
It's the figure,
There
yeah,
we
that
go.
one, yeah. There was this really interesting finding of the follower showing this desynchronization during when the leader was playing in the beginning. So I was just wondering about also the lateralization of that, like when they were observing. So it was the pattern of lateralization the same, like on this kind of left side, even though when they were just observing?
That's a good question. Actually, we took the approach of choosing the electrode based on their own solo performance. So actually this topography here is actually the solo condition relative to a computer control. Because we wanted to look at the electrode, that made sense for their own motor activation during their own execution. Mm-hmm. So I don't think we actually looked at laterality differences between execution and observation. So that would be something I would need to look at.
Mm.
Yeah.
It would be interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, that is something we should check out. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yes, let's jump to my question. I'm curious about the experience of the turntable device. It seems striking to me that you use a device which requires a completely continuous movement, whereas in most real-life movements, like locomotion, there's this combination of discrete and continuous elements. And intuitively, one would think that the discrete ones have a lot to do with the rhythmicization of the movement and of its experience and perception. So I wonder, so it seems to work well, which is kind of surprising to me, I must admit. I've never tried it myself, but do you have reports on how people find it to control it? Do you perhaps have measures like would there be a little acceleration or velocity change at the 360 degrees? Or have you ever thought about things like you might want to experience 4 beats, for instance, or 2, and then a little haptic or vibrotactile signal at the 180 or 90 degrees might help. Can you elaborate a little bit on what it is to use a completely continuous movement as a synchronization?
Yeah, those are great questions. So first thing is that we give them a lot of practice. So before they start the sort of the joint agency rating trials, the novices need practice starting on time, like hearing a metronome is starting where the 5th beat would be if there was one. So we have them practice just the starting motion to start with, and then they practice by themselves, and then they practice together. So we give them quite a bit of practice to criterion so that they can perform fairly well. Pretty much everyone, I think, everyone makes it through the practice. So right, it's doable. When I first played with them, I wanted to do this at the quarter points, right? Like I wanted to feel like a discrete change. We actually have just recently plotted, like we do have the motion data, so we just plotted that recently, and there is, I mean, I can't say anything really systematic about it, but yeah, there does appear to be a bit of a slowdown towards the top, I think it was. But that's something that, yeah, we're gonna be looking at just to see what people are doing, how much variability there is as well in what they're doing. The haptic feedback, I think, is a great suggestion too. We're actually talking about a project with the commercial version, the commercial songs version of the music boxes, and adding haptic feedback to see if that supports coordination a little easier. So yeah, I think I haven't collected anything systematic on those questions, but I think your intuitions are right that like it's a bit of an unusual experience. It is doable, but there may be ways to support it a little more strongly. Yeah.
Thanks. Yes.
Just a small comment to the fact that they are actually slowing down towards like the top position. It could be a way of accenting the one in the circle, because if you prolong the duration, you will have a perceived accent on the following beat. Duration is a way to accent a beat. So interesting if they're actually doing that.
Yeah, that would be really, really nice if we could, if we had systematic data that we could actually point to that, yeah.
Sure.
This is a question to do with the surveys that you were drawing from the music students and the general population survey. That when you were looking at group numbers, it seemed like you spanned the scale of like sort of intimate arrangements of people that knew each other, and then instances that would necessarily involve strangers who might be kind of within group or out of group, and on various dimensions. Was that a component of, because I mean, when you were initially introducing this idea, there was this social element and this role of strangers that may be prominent or not prominent in their reports, but by the scales involved, you kind of necessarily have to include them. So I wonder if you just have more to say about that social element in these different settings as you look across these experiences.
Yeah, in the survey of undergrads, we were able to characterize that reasonably well. And what it seemed like was that in the small to medium groups, that was usually made up of people they all know well, like all people who know each other well, or like, sort of uniformly similar level of experience with each other, if that makes sense. Whereas the pie chart had the sort of the sum category, where some of the people they were close to, that was most often, I would say most often, well anyways, that was often a case where I was with my friends and we were dancing at a club. So they were in the context of strangers, but they were with a group of people they were friends with. So I think your intuitions there are right too, which is that this is what I mean about the different features combining in different ways depending on the context. And I think group size and how it combines with different features is probably something that's very relevant. And that's where the sort of network analysis where we could maybe try to link them based on how often they co-occur, I think could be really useful. Yeah.
Yes, it seems. Well, I'll let you.
Yeah, wait, this is, again, related to this. All the instances that you gave were from, it seemed like face-to-face group experiences. And I wonder if there was any confusion about that, or if that was instructed, or how this connects, because there's a growing literature on virtual experiences, group experiences. And so did that come up or matter in,
There were a couple of people who reported it in virtual context, specifically in terms of singing in a virtual choir. So, yeah, there wasn't instructed, there were no instructions about what type of activity to tell us about. Most often they were reporting in person, but yeah, the data were collected, I want to say like 2019 to 2022, around there, so like during the COVID times. And so we had one of the memorable ones for me was this virtual choir that happened during COVID, and yeah, so there were some stories around that. And I guess if the data were collected now, maybe that would be even more, I don't know, more or less common, depending on if people are still doing that now that we have the option. Yeah, so yeah, it didn't come up a lot, but it did come up sometimes.
Yes, we still have time. Please.
So again, about this questionnaire, you said that there were a lot of instances of singing, and I don't recall if you said why you think that singing was so important, but the broader question is whether you think there is an effect of the different features, like sound features, that people are having to coordinate. So, for example, if it's timing plus blending of timbre, blending of pitch, if that has a role, or if there's a role of the mechanics that are going into producing sound. I wonder, if you could talk about that.
Yeah, also a great question. Singing was, we did categorize singing versus playing instruments, and singing was a little more often. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I feel like it was like 55% singing or so, maybe 60% singing. And people talked about exactly what you said, right? Well, the attention to tone and breathing came up. I would say there was not a ton of detail in relation to like elements of producing the sound, so I don't actually have an answer to your question, but that would be something that would be interesting to probe further, is like, what is the difference between singing versus playing an instrument, and especially in terms of how often these experiences occur. Certainly some of our participants said it's more likely to happen when I'm singing, but not everyone said that, and of course we didn't ask about it, so yeah, we don't have systematic information about that yet.
Okay, everybody happy, I hope. So let's close the session. Thanks again for this super lively talk and again, lively discussion, everybody, including audiences on YouTube and here. Let's close with another round of applause. Well-deserved one. Thank you, and everybody out there in the world. In the hall, watch out for the third edition of the seminar series on June 3 with Nori Jacobi.